well, let's get started. I'm Chris, and we're going to talk about some exciting things. There are 0 horses in this presentation, though, so in your face, David. All right, let's move over, though. Aww. Instead, we have the Mockingbirds. That's right, so the Mockingbirds are back. So you may recall we showed off the Mockingbirds back in January, something along those lines. And at that time, we created a chatbot using PVA, which is now Copilot Studio, right, which mocked you. Later, we created a birdalizer, which added ugly beaks to everyone's ugly faces, and that was exciting. Woo-woo! But now, the Mockingbirds want to take it to the next level, right? So they saw some of Hugo's demos, some of the things he's been doing with speech and some of the speech synthesis and so on. So they decided to look into that themselves, as birds do. It naturally makes sense. So let's take a look. So they've written an app, right? And it's over here on the workbench. Well, it will be. Let's add it to the workbench. I decided to use this icon since Twitter's not using it anymore. All right. There we go. So now we've got this guy. This is our beautiful app. I just realized I didn't share audio, though. So let's see. What's the magic way to share audio? Anybody remember?
It's up in the top. You could reshare if you want, but it's in the little toolbar when you're on the sharing little thing that's hovering over. Yeah.
Up here, this little thingy.
Yeah, we can't see it. Now we just look like you're clicking to nowhere. Yeah. But you see it.
Well, maybe I am. All right, now I shared my sound. That's great. So now the idea here is I've got a little microphone, right? I can click this microphone and I can talk. Let's say I have 14 trucks in a, room. Okay. All right. It's one of those things, maybe you should plan that out, but I didn't, right? So now we see that it captured that, right? It transcribed. You can see I have 14 trucks and apparently AI don't know room. Perfect. And then we can ask the Mockingbirds to say that back to us.
I'm Chris Kent, and I say, yep. I have 14 trucks and AI don't know room.
Get to hear a lovely voice here if you're not hearing it. The idea is a lovely sped up voice, right? We've got the little Mockingbirds. They mock whatever you say here, right? You can write it as well, right? We can say like, is a special angel, right? Angle, apparently. Angel. There we go.
I'm Chris Kent, and I say, Visa is a special angel. Pathetic.
Well, that's right. So there you go. So the idea here is we can do some really cool stuff, right? That's great. It's in the workbench. Wow, wow, wow. I made the SPFx web part. Everyone's happy. But then they're like, yeah, but like this should go in Teams, right? So no problem, right? We know that SPFx can be launched into Teams. The problem with some of that, right, is if you do some of the automatic deployment, it's going to generate a manifest for you. It's going to generate that. And we need device permissions, right? We have to be able to access the microphone to be able to get some of that stuff. And we have to be able to test that. So it's extra fun. All right, so let's take a look at the code, and then we're going to take a look at solving that problem with Teams. All right, let's see. Where's the old code? Whoop, whoop. There it is. All right, here we go. So if we come back over here, I'm just going to quickly go over the code, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of things we need to take a look at here. So I'm just pulling in the Microsoft Cognitive Services Speech SDK. I'm using the free plan. It gives me like 5 hours of audio a month. Plenty for development. I just spun it up in Azure, and all I really needed to know was my API key and the region, which I have then shoved into a settings document, which I'm not showing. This is my settings sample, right? This is what it looks like, though. It's just a JSON file. That's what this thing is with my secret API key you may not know, right? And so on. But we like to use this technique here, and we have like a little NPM script that Copilot can do it, right? Oh, that's a good point. There are horses. Dang it, I said there'd be no horses. What have I done? All right. Well, either way. But you can hot swap between environments and APIs and so on by using a settings type thing. So that's what I'm doing here. And then I just read those in. So that's it. So in my web part, I'm just going to really quickly go over this, and then you can take a look at the code later. This is how easy it is to get set up with the Speech SDK, right? I just pass in my region. I pass in my API key. And I say it's English, and I say what voice I want. And there we go. There we go. Those are free sound effects. We don't need David's sound effects. I got my own. All right. And then we take all that, we pass that down into the microphone. All right, so we've got our microphone here. And again, I'm not going to go over a whole lot of this. The main point of this is that everything's using a hook, right? So it's using this speech hook. So we got the listening, displaying. We got some actions. And that allows me to do very easy things like, when I come down here to handle record, I can just say, hey, go transcribe it, right? I'll wait till you're done with transcribing it, And I can do the same kind of thing here when I say handle the plane, right? All I'm going to do is I'm going to say go speak it, and I give you this lovely thing here, all right? And then I can make sure to mock you extra. That's always nice. And so that works great, right? And so then we can see how does that actually happen here. And this is where the fancy code that I stole from Hugo is. All right, so we've got this idea that we come in here and all we have to do is just transcribe. Is we're going to grab this microphone and we're going to say, hey, you got to recognize that. And then we launch it off. And we say, hey, when you're done, give us back that text. Wow. And that's pretty cool. And then when you come down here, we have the idea of playing it. The main thing you want to note here is that I'm playing it with this exciting stuff. This looks like camel, but it's not. It's SAML. But the idea is here, I can just pass by escape text in here. So this is the text that, I've already gotten back or they've entered. All right, and I'm just saying, hey, I want it to be real fast. I want it to be real high pitched because these are birds. And I really like that I can pass a style in. And in this case, I'm passing the unfriendly style. I really like that that's an option. So if you're interested in what voices are available and what styles are available and how to configure all this stuff, there is a voice studio. So when you go to set up your free speech SDK, not speech SDK, your speech in Azure, right there it'll say launch voice studio. When you launch that, depending on your region, you've got a bunch of options for voices and styles and pitches, and you can configure all those there, and then just copy that sample out. Okay, so moving on. That's the exciting code. Again, you can check that out because the point here is not necessarily all of this, but we can come back and take a look at what we have to do. So if I want this in Teams, right? And I already mentioned that I need to have my own manifest. So I've gone ahead and created a manifest here for that. All right, so this is available. If you go to the SPFx documentation website, they've got all the information you need here. I've got my bot in here. I've got some other tabs in here. Again, another reason why you might want to do a custom manifest if you've got multiple tabs, not just your SPFx app. Right, so I've got the microphone tab. And the key point here is I'm loading it from my site collection app catalog, right, for the Teams login. And then I'm also redirecting to that same place. Right, and then I have my component ID. That's that web part GUID. You just copy that out and you replace that out here. Again, if you go to the SPFx documentation site, they've got a guide there with the little placeholders to swap out. And then make sure that when you do that, you also include this guy down here, this web application info. Again, you just copy that directly off the website. You don't need to memorize that, but that's what allows that authentication to happen. And this is the key one right here, device permissions media. Right, that's what's going to allow me to access the microphone should I request it. Okay, so there we go. Now I've got a beautiful manifest. Wow, 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 wow. All right, and if we want to put that in Teams, we can. All right, we can, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I haven't actually served this thing, right? So I'm serving it here, but let's come back and take a look at a couple things, and then we're going to take a look at how that shows up in Teams and what we can do with it. So one of the things I've got, right, is I was in the browser. I was on the workbench, but I need to test Teams-specific stuff. Right, so if we look at the web part, you can see that by default you get this interesting environment message, right? So this came just with the default scaffolding, right? You can see it's inspecting the Teams.js context, right, to find out where you're running. There's some additional things you can get off of there, right? So we'll get that back in here. We'll come back down here. If we were to want to inspect a little further, right, we could definitely say context.app.host. Right, client type, and we say, does it equal one of these things? So we can find out, hey, I'm specifically running an iOS, right? I'm on the iPad, stuff like that. So if you really need to know details about where you are, right? You want to see if you're on old Teams or new Teams, you can do all that here. So that's important. But one of the things I wanted to mention here, you'll find this little note on the website saying, hey, the version of Teams.js you have is not the version you will have when you're running inside Teams necessarily, right? So it's a little bit weird. So you'll see that the package that's installed by default is running Teams.js 2.12, but the latest version is, or not the latest version, the version that you'll find elsewhere, right, when you actually run it is 2.22. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because sometimes there are certain like beta methods or other things you might want to call. For instance, I happen to be aware because I was searching for it, right? I would like, hey, surely there's a has permission and request permission, right? Endpoints. There are, but they were introduced later. And so they are not going to show up for you in SPFx. You're going to get errors if you try and access them, even though they are technically there when they get loaded on the page. So what? So here's how we handle that. So you can just extend the types, right? So one of the things, I've got this little permission stuff here, right? You can see I have this request permission with that request permission on there. And if we try and see it, nah, that doesn't exist, right? And same with has permission, does not exist. So we can help that out. So we can create this little file here, which I'm going to uncomment so that it works. All right, and what we're doing is we're just extending the definition of the types. So we're not doing anything. We're not adding anything to Teams.js. We're just saying, hey, by the way, these are going to exist. So go check them out, right? And then just for me, I've linked to the documentation so I can find them. Now, the important thing to note is if you do this, make sure you include that import, because if you don't, it's going to replace the whole thing, and that's lame. But now if you come back here, now you can see, I've got has permission, I've got request permission are available. I can call them, and that's great. So now I can start testing those things out. Again, those don't make sense outside of Teams, though, so let's get into Teams. And let's also save that before I forget. Okay, so if we get into Teams real quick, by getting our manifest, one of the things I have got to do here is get this served up. So one of the you can serve, sorry, let me back up. If you wanted to show it in Teams, and we did this in January, if you want to see that very specifically with the gulp serve command, all you need to do is pack everything up with a local serve, right? So the standard serve right here, the port 4321, and you're just going to pack everything up. So let's pack that stuff up. And in fact, I say pack it up, but let's actually make it packable by going to the package.json, and I'm just going to add a script here, right, which I'm going to call pack, right, and we'll say gulp clean, and you don't need to say --ship, but if you don't, then it's going to tell it to debug, and that's annoying, right, and then we're going to say gulp bundle ship, and I'm just running multiple commands by putting this ampersand in between them, right, and there we go, and I'm going to add another one for pack local, right, which, hey, look, it figured it out, which is pretty much everything like that, but no ship, bye ship, right? That's it. So this is because I also am a lazy developer. Hugo's not the only one, right? And I don't like to write those every time, and I'll forget my clean all the time. So now I can just say npm run pack local, right? And what that does is it's going to go clean it, it's going to bundle it, it's going to pack it up for me. It's real nice, right? Woo, woo, woo. So there we go. And we can find out that I apparently, I left that host client type in, silly me. Okay, so that's great. But what if I want to serve this and I want to see it on my phone, right? Or I want to go elsewhere. If that's all running off my local host, even if I've got a deployed app, right, that's pointed at my local host, the phone, right, your native apps are never going to be able to load those, right? They're not going to load from the local host. They just won't. So luckily, VS Code has you covered, right? So one of the things you can do is you can serve this thing and switch it a little bit. So if we go to my serve.json, instead of port 4321, I can set this to 443, right? Because I want to do HTTPS directly, and I can create a port. So I'm going to forward a port. So this is using something called dev tunnels behind the scenes. It's just integrated directly into VS Code. So if you've done something with like ngrok, or you've done something with Cloudflare before, any of those types of tools, those are all available, and there's some guides on how to make those work. So if you're already using those, that's great. But you don't need to use those because you just need a GitHub account and port forwarding here. So I'm going to say 4321, right, visual code. I will give that a moment here. Now, I've already done this once, so it didn't prompt me with a bunch of stuff. But let's take a look at what those prompts look like briefly over here. Right, so it's going to tell you, hey, you got to sign in with GitHub again, right? You say, yeah, sure. You hit allow. It's going to pop up. And if you've already signed in before, it's just going to say additional permissions. Otherwise, it's going to list a few things. This is, things like being able to see your repos, log you in, so on. Just review those permissions, and if you're comfortable, move on. And then, of course, you're going to see another one here where you're going to authorize those dev tunnels. All right, there you go. Very exciting. And then if you keep those on private, before you can use those, you have to open those in a browser and authorize them. So I'm going to recommend you don't keep them on private for now. That could be very important, right, if you're doing something like using these for, say, a web service, right? So these are a fantastic way. If you've got a web service that's running locally and you want to debug it against it with your SPFx web part, right, you can't call from the web part to localhost. It's going to freak out on you and say, yeah, you can't make that call, but you can set up a forwarded port here with the dev tunnel, and you can do that real easy, and you just set up this kind of privacy here. Wow. So again, there are guides for all that. It's built into VS Code, so that's great. And we'll come back here. But once you've built that, we'll take a look at just this so I don't have to show you since I'm running out of time here. When you deploy with that in there, we'll show you where you put this. You're going to see this when you deploy. This is what you want, right? This means it's going to be loading all of your assets and all your bundle, all that stuff from this location. And that's going to make it available all over the place. And this is just forwarding things to local host. Ooh, fancy. So let's come back here and take a look at that. So all we have to add here is host name. Got a host name, and that is going to be this guy. So let's copy that. Let's paste that in. Let's get rid of the HTTPS part, though. We don't need that. All right, there we go. So we pasted our host name in there, and by doing that, and we run that pack local, that's what's going to allow you to then deploy the app catalog, which I have already done just for time. So we're going to skip that. But the idea is if I take my manifest, now that it's pointed over there, and I go to the Finder, let's get this guy. So I've just thrown some icons in there, right? That I made. Is very, very pretty. And then I have my manifest. Now the key to making a Teams manifest is to directly do this. Don't do this on a folder, right? They have to be directly in the folder. On a Mac, you could say compress. On Windows, you say send to, zip archive. Right? It is just a simple zip. You can name it whatever you want. Doesn't matter. It's just going to be inspected by Teams. So if we head over to Teams, let's see, where's Teams? There's Teams. Let's bring Teams on over. Come here, Teams. All right, we come down to our apps. Say manager apps. I'm going to sideload an app, so you have to have the permission to sideload an app. I'm in my dev tenant, so I do. Load custom app, my archive right there. Boom, microphone. Oh, great. All right, so this is all coming from that manifest that I put together. We'll just hit add here, and we'll see if it pops up. You could do it. All right. So there's our chatbot we built before, right? And now if we go over to microphone, it will fail because we're not actually serving it. So let's go serve it. By the way, if you see this, this is just a side note. Object is your error. This is so friendly, right? This almost definitely means your web part strings are not what they expect, right? So it's probably coming back in like an ngrok, whatever. It's that permission page is sending HTML back instead of what it expects. This is what it'll get. So if you see object, probably you're not loading from the right location. Okay. Let's come back here and let's actually serve this thing. So I'm going to serve this. I'm going to serve it with fast serve because then I don't have to change any of these things. So if you haven't used fast serve, it is awesome. And let's pull that up real quick. So fast serve is by Sergey Sergeyev, right? So he's built this thing. I use this on every SPFx project I do, so I highly recommend it. You just install it globally, and then you run it locally in your project, and it will add a few things. And one of the things it adds is the ability to auto reload, so a hot reload as you're saving. It also makes things a lot faster when you're doing it. It is wonderful. Okay, and it makes this all possible as well. So I'm going to run npm run serve, which is the fast serve command. All right, so I'm running that. Running on my host, right? So I've got my port here. Now, a couple things to note with the port is you need to make sure, and this one drove me crazy, it's HTTP by default. So you have to turn it to HTTPS for this to work. And your port visibility, again, is private if you want to log in with the browser, but if you just switch to public, then you just say, yeah, that's great. I'm not doing anything sensitive here. I'm fine with that, right? So there we go. So now I should be able to go into my Teams. That's the one. Now let's try and refresh this guy. Reload the app. Aha! So that just loaded over that spot, right? And it should work for us. Let's see. Yep, there we go. So we can see those are those device permissions, right? So we already put in for Teams. So now we can see, hey, in Teams, it's actually asking for those permissions, right? So we're going to allow that. Hey, Teams, how you doing? There we go. That's wonderful, right? Okay, so now in the last little part of the demo here is I want to show you on the phone. So let's actually take this over and screen mirror. All righty. See all that? So now let's refresh. That same thing going on. Drag down to refresh. And now, aha, look at that. So this is running from my local host. This is me screen mirroring my iPhone, right? So I'm able to test directly in Teams Mobile, you can see that I have this click to grant permissions and requesting permissions. Pretty awesome, right? So this really makes this great. So it's going to request permissions. Again, I'm going to go ahead and swap out of this for now just so we can jump back to the main thing and I can wrap it up. Yes, I do need to charge my phone. Good point. All right. So there we go. That's what I wanted to show. We'll make sure I gave Hugo like 5 minutes. You're welcome, Hugo. Last thing I wanted to... I lost my PowerPoint. So that's fine. It was just a review of this, which is this guy here, which I'll just show for the video. Boom! In everyone's favorite way to see it in not presenter mode. Okay, and that's it for me.